Eliza, you gotta keep it on the down low, babe, Brian said with those puppy dog eyes drilling into me. Let's just say you're a sales clerk or something chill like that, yeah? I could tell he was serious, but still, the request rang strange in my ears. A clerk? Brian, you've seen my business degree framed on the wall, right? Totally. He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. But my mom's, she's special, you know? Don't want her making a fuss or something. I raised an eyebrow, but nodded. All right, for you, I'll be the world's best sales clerk, I said with a laugh, not realizing then that fabricating this tiny piece of my reality for his parents would unfold into something ugly and hard to handle. Soon enough, we rolled up to his folks' place. It was your typical suburbia, well, if every house looked like it could be on the cover of a homestyle mag, that is. Brian rang the bell, giving my hand a quick squeeze before the door swung open. And there she was, Linda, all coiffed hair and a smile that was a little too, let's just say she wouldn't have been out of place as a game show host. Well, look at you, she appraised as she ushered us in. Brian says you're in retail? I plastered on my best customer service smile. Yeah, just selling clothes in a shop downtown, I said casually. Retail, huh? Linda eyed me up and down, her smile barely flinching, like she's heard better jokes at a funeral. I supposed you didn't feel like aiming higher? Brian shot me a play-along glance. Nah, she loves it, he jumped in quickly. She loves it, Linda echoed, as if tasting the words. Right. Then she floated away, leaving a silence that felt like standing in a room after someone's just slammed a door. Later, when Linda went to powder her nose, or count her coins or whatever, Brian found me in their living room, which was too clean, like no one really lived there. He had this I ate something bad look as he spilled the family tea. He told me all about Linda's thing for the slot machines, the way she borrows money faster than a bank can print it. She'd bled his dad dry and was always circling Brian for a handout like it was a national sport. We talking a little gambling fun or full-on Vegas blowout? I asked him, trying to sort the scale of what we were dealing with. He grimaced. Professional league. She's up to her eyeballs in it. If there's a machine with blinking lights, she's there, batting her eyelashes at it. The wedding, if you could even call it that, was as low frills as a diner breakfast. We figured why blow cash on just one day when we're aiming for a lifetime. Not that I had any illusions about Linda seeing eye to eye with me on that. In our backyard, dressed up, but not overdone, Brian looked nervous but happy. I kept things as chill as I could, in jeans and a nice blouse, because why not? Linda, on the other hand, turned up looking like she just lost a bet, wearing a dress that screamed I would rather be anywhere but here. The rest of the shindig passed, without much drama. Friends joked, the grill sizzled, and life felt almost normal for a hot second. Aunt Marcy was on music, hooking up an old boombox that squealed before it sang. Our first dance was to a song that skipped a few times, but Brian and I just laughed it off and kept on dancing. It wasn't until everyone had had their fill of burgers and cake that the real fun began. Linda dug in true Linda fashion, not on food, but us, again. She found me, her eyes a little glassy from the party favors. You know, Eliza, marrying into this family means you're part of the clan now. I nodded, that's usually how it goes. And clans stick together. You never know when one of us might be in a bind. That's what families do. Help each other. The not-so-subtle hint in her voice was thicker than the icing on our cheap but tasty cake. I caught on quick. Sure, families help, but we also just made it clear we're saving up for other stuff, remember? Her smile was a thin line. Just saying, a penny saved today might be a penny needed tomorrow. By any one of us. Brian swung by then, slinging an arm around me. And any penny we save is staying with us, for our future, isn't that right, babe? Nailed it, I said, high-fiving him. With arms linked, we wandered off, leaving Linda to stew in the middle of a party that was everything she didn't want. She didn't dance after that, instead sat like a queen in exile, sipping and watching, but thankfully keeping her money thoughts to herself. It was maybe 2 weeks into this whole married gig when Linda turned our twosome into a crowd. Without fail, every payday, she'd be waiting outside the office where Brian worked, hanging around like a bad habit. One of those afternoons, I swing by to take Brian out for lunch. And there she is, leaning on the hood of her car, tapping her foot like she's on stage keeping time for a rock band. We hadn't even made it back to our car when she met us halfway, her voice rising above the sounds of the city like a siren. "There you are. I've been waiting half an hour, Brian. We need to talk." Brian's usually the calm type, but I saw that jaw clench. "Mom, not now. I'm on break, and we've got plans." She wasn't one to be sidelined though. "This is more important than your plans. I've got bills to pay, and since we're family now." I had to jump in, couldn't help it. "Hold up, Linda. We talked about this. We're not your personal ATM." Her gaze snapped to me, sharp as a tack. "Listen, girl, you married into this. You've got a duty now." Brian stepped between us, trying to keep the peace. "Mom, you've gotta stop doing this. It's not fair to us, or you. There's people that can help with." Linda's laugh cut him off, low and mean. "Help? I don't need help, I need money. And my son's not gonna leave his mother out to dry." "People are staring, Linda. This ain't the place," I said, my voice steady but firm, wishing I could just pull Brian away. But Linda was on a roll. "Fine. I'll be by the house later, and we can sort this out. Don't make me wait, Brian," she warned, poking him hard in the chest, before she turned on her heel and strutted off. At the sandwich shop, we grabbed a corner booth and tried to shake off the Linda encounter. Brian was rubbing his temples, looking like he could use something stronger than a soda. I reached over, my fingers bumping his. "Babe, maybe it's time to cut the cord. She's walking all over us." He sighed, heavy and long, like he was deflating. I know. It's just not easy, Eliza. She's always been this way." The rest of lunch was us making plans, figuring out how to tackle the Linda issue without a blowout. By the time we got back to work, we had the makings of a game plan, or at least the start of one. That evening, as predicted, Linda was banging on our front door like it owed her money. When we let her in, she wasted no time. "I don't have all night," she snapped, dropping her purse on our kitchen table like she owned the place. "Mom, we can't keep doing this," Brian started, but she bulldozed right over him. "Can't or won't," she challenged, eyeing me as if I was holding the strings to Brian's wallet. "It's not healthy, for any of us," I came back at her, trying to keep my cool. She squared her shoulders, ready for a fight. "Healthy? What's healthy is a roof over my head and food on my plate." "And we've been helping with that," Brian said, a bit of steel finally in his voice. "But this is it, the last time. We're saving up, you know that." Linda's eyes narrowed, and she let out a hiss of disbelief. "The last time, huh? Don't make promises you can't keep, boy." "Enough," Brian snapped, surprising us both. "You get help, Mom, or this is it." We didn't give her the money that night. It felt like a victory, small but mighty. Linda left in a huff, the door slamming behind her like the finale of a thunderstorm. Brian's phone buzzed off the table just as we were getting ready to call it a night. It was the kind of call that drains the color from your face. Tom, Brian's dad and Linda's husband, had landed himself in the hospital. His heart had decided to pull a fast one on him. "Jesus," Brian cursed under his breath, fumbling with his keys. We bolted out the door before the echo of our slamming door had time to fade. The harsh lights of the hospital were a stark change to our dim cozy living room. I could see Brian's chest heaving as we made our way to the front desk. The lady there pointed us to the right wing with a bored expression like she'd seen it all before. We found Tom in the ICU, hooked up to more beeps and blips than a video game arcade. Seeing him like that, all wires and tubes, it got to Brian. I saw his eyes water, his hands shake. "Dad," he choked out, gripping the railing of the hospital bed. Tom's eyes were closed, but they fluttered like he heard us. I put a hand on Brian's back, no words, because what could I say? It's then, watching the rise and fall of Tom's chest, that Brian turns to me, his voice a low tremble. "Where's Mom?" Good question. I pull out my phone and gave Linda a call. No answer. So I tried again. And again. When she finally picked up, the noise in the background wasn't the beep of hospital machines, it was the clatter of a slot machine. "Linda?" I said, my voice almost as brittle as the hospital sheets. "Tom's had a heart attack. We're at the hospital." There's a pause, a cash register's ring, cutting through. "Yeah? And you should be here." Brian grabbed the phone from me, nearly shouting. "Your husband's lying in a damn hospital bed." She sighed like we were discussing the weather. "Tell him I'll pop by in the morning. I'm busy right now, cashing in some stuff." I could see the muscles in Brian's jaw jump. He threw the phone back at me, storming off to find a doctor or maybe just to punch a wall where no one could see. That night and into the morning, Tom got a bit better, but Linda never showed. The doc said it was a warning sign, that he could have another attack if he didn't slow down. We went home exhausted, the morning sun stinging our eyes. Walking in, it was like a burglary, only Linda wasn't taking TVs or jewelry. No, she was packing up Tom's vinyl collection, the one thing he loved more than anything. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" Brian stormed into the room, looking like he was ready to explode. "These are worth something," she snapped without looking up. "Don't worry, Tom won't miss 'em. Besides, hospital bills, remember?" "Hospital bills?" Brian was fuming. "That's rich, coming from you. You didn't even go see him." She rolled her eyes, stopped packing for a split second to stare Brian down. "Look, your father's tough, he'll be fine. But these bills ain't gonna pay themselves." But Brian was having none of it. "Put them back, Mom. Now." He moved towards her, his hands balled into fists. Linda stared him down, met his anger with a sneer. "Make me." I stepped between them. "Enough," I said, my voice steady. "Just stop. Dad needs us to be a family right now." The tension could have been cut with a knife. Linda looked from me to Brian, shrugged, and tossed the record she was holding back into the box. What she said next was like a punch to the gut. "Family sticks together, right? But when it's convenient for you too, huh?" She left without another word, the sound of the door closing behind her was the only goodbye. I looked at Brian, at the mess in the room. "She doesn't get it," I whispered. "She really doesn't get it." He didn't have an answer. We cleaned up in silence, Tom's records settling back onto their shelves like old friends coming home. The news hit us like a rogue wave. Tom was gone, just like that. The world had the nerve to keep spinning, the sun to keep rising and setting, as if nothing had shifted beneath our feet. Brian was numb, you could see it in the way he moved, like somebody had filled his shoes with lead. We did what people do in these times. Made calls, arranged for a funeral, picked a casket, a dark, polished thing that seemed too grand for Tom, who'd never cared for flash. The house was a mess of flowers and sympathy cards, the air thick with the smell of lilies and the sound of muttered condolences. Linda was nowhere. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air, her presence erased from our immediate reality. People asked about her, of course. "Families always hit the hardest," they'd say, nodding like that explained everything. Days passed, and she was still MIA. Brian had stopped asking after her. Stopped wanting to hear her excuses or lies. Then, the funeral. I expected her to be there at least, to show her face, say her goodbyes. But she was a no-show. "Hollow," was all Brian said, looking at the empty seat next to him reserved for his mom, the word echoing in the quiet of the chapel. The service came and went. Linda's absence was the elephant in the room, a constant undercurrent to every conversation. A mother should be there, crying, holding on to memories of better days, not this. It was maybe a week after, I ran into Linda at the grocery store. If you could call it running into her. She was at the end of an aisle, dressed to the nines, a grin on her face like she'd won the lottery. "Look at you," I greeted, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She swiveled around, that grin never fading. "Well, if it isn't the grieving widow. Lighten up, will ya? It's not the end of the world." My fists clenched at my sides, but I stood my ground. "You didn't even come to the funeral, Linda. How could you?" She shrugged, her jewelry clinking with the motion. "What's the point? Sobbing over a hole in the ground? That's not for me. Besides, Tom left a tidy sum. I'm rich at last." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the dirty glares from other shoppers. "How can you be so cold? Brian's a big boy. He'll get over it." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Everyone does." "That man loved you till his last breath," I shot back, my voice shaking now. Linda just laughed. "Love, love. In the end, it's money that keeps you warm at night." I could feel people watching, feel the scene we were making. It took everything in me not to scream at her. So, I turned on my heel and walked away, the sound of her cackles following me like a bad taste in my mouth. As the automatic doors closed behind me, shutting out the noise, I gripped the handle of my cart so tight my knuckles turned white. I had to remind myself, Tom's memory deserved better than this, better than her. The sun was barely up, and there was a wild knocking at the door that could wake the dead. I was sipping my first coffee of the day when Brian's mom, Linda, came crashing into the kitchen like a whirlwind in a thrift store dress. Her hair was every which way, and her eyes were wild. "Everything's gone," she hollered right off the bat, like we were in the middle of a fight we didn't know we had. "Tom left me with nothing but a pile of debts." Brian, who'd been halfway through a bowl of cereal, dropped his spoon and it clattered loudly. "What the hell, Mom? No money, no nothing. Just bills and more bills." Linda was waving her arms now, papers flying from her hands like panicked birds. It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Then she fixed her eyes on Brian like he was some ATM. "You gotta give me your dad's watch and that fancy ring he had. They're worth a fortune." Brian's face went rock hard. "Dad's buried with his watch and ring, Mom. You know that. He wanted it that way." That stopped her, for a microsecond. "Well, dig him up then." The words came out of her mouth so fast you'd think she'd said, "Please, and thank you, and by your leave." "Nah, ain't happening." Brian shook his head, leaning back in his chair as if he needed the distance. "They're staying with Dad. End of story." Linda looked like she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whipped around with her coat flapping behind her like dark wings. She was out the door before we could say another word. It wasn't even light out yet when the knock came. I knew it wasn't good. Cops don't do house calls at the crack of dawn to share a cup of joe. I was barely awake, struggling to make sense of the two uniforms and serious badges at my door. Brian stood behind me, boxers and bedhead, rubbing his eyes like he could wipe away this bad dream. "Brian and, sorry, ma'am, your name?" the taller one asked. "I'm Eliza," I managed, my voice gravelly with sleep. "You folks know a Linda Harrison?" The cop had that cop look, not quite suspicious, not quite sorry. Brian nodded, shoved his hands in his hair. "Yeah, my mom." "What's she done this time?" "She's been arrested," the officer said, and his partner handed us a slip of paper. "Caught trying to dig up her late husband's grave." Brian cussed under his breath, a stream of words that would make a sailor blush. "I'll put some pants on," he grumbled. We were down at the station, faster than I'd like, the kind of place you never want to be. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the coffee from a machine too weak. Linda was sitting there, her pride fighting with the dirt on her clothes. The sight would have been comical if it weren't so damn sad. "What the hell, Mom?" Brian threw his hands up as we approached the bars. Don't you what the hell me, Brian, Linda shot back, fire in her eyes. I did what I had to do. You tried to rob Dad's grave, Mom. Brian's voice was a tight wire about to snap. That watch would have paid off everything. She hissed back, gripping the cell bars like they were the only thing holding her upright. And what? You didn't think about us, huh? Brian towered over her, all muscle and anger. I put a hand on his arm, could feel the coiled tension like a live wire. Let's talk this out. There's nothing to talk out. Linda spat. I don't expect you to understand. Not until you hit rock bottom, too. Linda, this ain't rock bottom. This is digging a hole straight to hell, I said, my own anger flaring. The ride home was silent. We knew the day would come when we'd hear from Linda again. That's the thing with debt, it's like a zombie. You think it's dead, but it can come back with a vengeance. But for now, we'd leave the dead to their sleep and the living to their mistakes. We had a life to live, and no amount of digging would change our course. There was no going back after what she did. Brian tossed our old phones into a donation bin the next town over, and I watched the numbers light up like unwanted stars, before going dark for good. We didn't owe anyone an explanation, least of all her. As the city limits faded in the rear view, our new future was a cozy apartment in a nameless neighborhood, where the nosy next-door neighbor couldn't pick her out of a lineup, much less us. It was a good setup, neat and clean, with just the right amount of space for two people looking to dodge the ghost of family drama. We unpacked our lives, minus the baggage of anyone else's mistakes. Brian hammered together discount bookshelves with the sort of focus you might mistake for anger if you didn't know him. But that was just Brian being Brian, all in or nothing. I'm not thinking about her, you know, he said over the squeal of a stubborn screw. I nodded from where I sorted our collection of DVDs, comedy, stacked separate from the action, a place for everything. I know. We didn't talk about her after that. We didn't need to. Weeks spun out and the city we left might have been another planet for all the market left. But small talk has a way of traveling, and it wasn't long before a text from an old neighbor found its way to us through the blurry social network of people we used to know. She'd gotten off with a suspended sentence and a wad of fines instead of jail time, now spending her days scanning groceries and chipping away at her mountain of debt. We heard she's living in a place with cracks in the walls and plumbing from the dark ages, but if she was looking for sympathy, she wouldn't find any here. Brian read the text over my shoulder and huffed out a laugh that almost sounded like relief. Guess she's getting by, then, was all he said before going back to his new video game, thumbs tap dancing over the controller like it was just another day. And really, it was no more drama, just us and our quiet life. Gets what she deserves, I muttered, deleting the text and blocking the number. No loose ends. Yeah, Brian agreed, pausing his game to look at me. But that's her circus, not ours. We knew that somewhere out there she was still picking up the pieces, but we were too busy building something new to care. Sometimes people break things too badly to put them back together, and that's just the way of it. Our world was small but full, weekly movie nights and lazy Sundays, bills paid on time and no calls in the night to shake us from our sleep. Think she'll try to find us? I asked once, the closest I came to asking what if. Brian's eyes met mine, steady and sure. Let her try. So we just kept living, quiet and low, like two survivors after the storm had passed. No looking back, no echoes of the past, just forward to the next day and the day after that.